Hi, my name is Jeremy. I'm sorry I'm not here to present in person. My flight got moved, but I was asked to present a little bit about my automated time-lapse camera system for aurora capture that I've called AurorEye. And I've just been testing it up in the Yukon here, and here's a photo of it doing its thing at a place called Midnight Dome above Dawson City in the Yukon. The place might be remembered for its gold rush history. I was very fortunate to catch a few substorms, and I'll show you that footage in a moment. But today I'll just present why I decided to make a robotic camera. Why not just use my existing camera equipment? What its benefits are, what are some challenges, and what the state of the project is in right now. And the reason I'm presenting this is because I want your feedback. I'd love to know, as both photographers and researchers, citizen scientists, what sort of features you'd like to see in this direction. What kind of opportunities are there? What kind of features would help us get imagery that is useful from a research perspective and also useful from a citizen science and outreach perspective. My goal is to have a camera that really assists with doing that, and we'll get into that in this very brief presentation. I want to start by saying humans in general are citizen scientists. That's really where this is coming from, is that everybody should be able to contribute to research, especially when the research subject is the sky that everybody can see just by looking up. When it comes to aurora photography, I've experienced two different overlapping groups that gather the imagery, researchers and aurora chasers. Where they overlap, they both capture images with their own types of instrumentation, but where they overlap is the opportunity to capture novel, interesting, new, different image data, whether that's through a consumer SLR camera or through a scientific grade sensor. On the aurora chaser side, we like to catch an amazing image, which can be very novel, but it's not the main reason. Data collection is not the main reason we're aurora chasing. We don't set up our cameras with the right UTC clock time, the right longitude, latitude. Maybe the lens parameters aren't quite right, or maybe the most interesting thing is seeing the whole sky at once, not just framing one interesting feature. So aurora chasers are going to catch data, but it's not the main reason they are chasing. And recovering data from those photos can sometimes be a bit of reverse engineering. On the other hand, you have instrument grade all sky cameras like this one. This is part of the Themis network. And these research cameras, they are designed to capture time-lapse imagery day in and day out for years at a time from a fixed location with specialized calibrated sensors, often with a lot of money involved. This is part of a larger project, a larger network involving many people over many years. So it's a different scale altogether than an aurora chaser going out for the night with their SLR and a wide-angle lens. The advantage the research cameras have is because they're calibrated, because they see the whole sky at once, and we know their locations and timings, we can synchronize all their imagery to create a mosaic, like this one here over northwestern North America. This calibrated data from the imagery can be combined with space instruments, for example, satellites that are flying through that image region at the same time. Those conjunctions can actually yield additional information insight, also with ground instruments like magnetometers. It's that synthesis of data that makes calibrated information or calibrated imagery so useful. So the thought was, what if we give the aurora chasers portable all-sky camera stations, kind of like the researchers have, using off-the-shelf equipment? We would get sort of an adaptive mosaic network that is smart about gathering interesting aurora data. The aurora chasers don't go out when it's cloudy. They don't leave their cameras running out in the wilderness for months at a time. They don't have to be that robust. They just have to go out for that night. They're going to capture information. And a portable all-sky station, we'd want something that is very hands-off, doesn't get in the way, doesn't interfere with the aurora chaser's main job of getting their own photography, but it comes along for the ride, like R2-D2 in the back of Luke's X-Wing. There is precedent for having citizen scientists contribute to data collection. The International Geophysical Year, the IGY of 1957, they gave out little paper pads where you could draw the aurora and send these in like postcards to central locations that put this data together in IBM punch cards and early computers with vacuum tubes, and they created synoptic auroral maps of sightings and locations. This is before any satellites were getting imagery from space. You could use the radial view of people just looking around like their own little aurora stations to record and gather data. So there is precedent for making sure that data collected by amateurs and citizen scientists is of scientific value with the proper calibrations of say, longitude, latitude, timing. The device that I came up with comes from my experience of doing photography, being an engineer, and also just freezing while I'm taking photography all night. Running one camera is hard enough. Running multiple cameras is a juggling act. So I really wanted something that was automated, hands-off, self-contained, and basically like a little R2-D2. It just did its thing on a tripod while I took my own pictures. So I envisioned something that was basically a hard shell camera case but had a hole cut in it to allow an all-sky fisheye lens look up at the entire sky at once, and maybe a Raspberry Pi single board computer controlling that camera and doing all the thinking for me. It would allow sync with GPS location and timestamp. It would take the images and save them. When you brought this back from the field at the end of a night of shooting and put it in your living room to recharge off of a USB charger, just like a phone, it would connect with the local Wi-Fi network and download the relevant image information automatically. So it really is sort of hands-off in that respect. You set it up and let it go. So that's why I envisioned, and that's why I attempted to build. Right now I'm just testing the first prototype, and I'll share the results with you. One of the first things is it has to be able to get through airplane or airport security and fit under the seat in front of me. And so here's a picture of it being transported to up north to the Yukon right now. It fits nicely under the seat because it's a standard hard shell case that airport security see so often. They didn't really question it too much. It just looked like a container full of camera equipment. So it's one of those things that could have been a showstopper if they didn't let it fly around or travel around, but fortunately it looks innocuous and sort of fits in standard airline requirements. Here's an image of a substorm captured with that all-sky fisheye lens. I call this FOMO in fisheye, fear of missing out. That's FOMO. And the idea with a fisheye lens is the center of the circular image is straight above the zenith, and north, south, east, west are the extreme edges of the image circle. You can't miss what's happening behind you because there is no behind you. With a fisheye lens, everything is in front of you, and that's the advantage of these instrument cameras. You can also take this sort of sphere of data and reproject it for virtual reality, YouTube 360, or reproject it as if you took a subset of the sky with a different lens later on. That's the advantage of having a fisheye lens. You have a lot of options later, and that whole image is projected onto the image sensor. The other thing too is, of course, it's calibrated to some degree with longitude, latitude, where it's pointed, and it has a better chance of being scientifically useful than trying to remember where you were when your image was taken, what your camera parameters were, your lens parameters. It allows probably a little better opportunity of overlaying this data with other information, say a conjunction of a satellite with some information, or even if you had multiple AurorEye cameras, say 10 or 20 kilometers apart, it allows you to establish altitude and 3D position of a feature using triangulation. Let's go into the actual hardware here. There's a weather-resistant camera dome, of course. It doesn't always have to be on, but it's there optionally, like a MagSafe. It clicks on with magnets. Plastic hard case, of course, because they're already designed to be waterproof, easy to carry, robust. Why not just continue using something like that than reinventing the wheel? And in the side, there's a little aluminum paddle with a 1-inch display and 4 touch buttons, just to keep everything very, very simple. It can be used with gloves. And it doesn't get in the way. It's basically a Tamagotchi, if you remember those little games. It's what is the health and the happiness of your camera and what is it up to. That's all you need to know. In the lid, there's an aluminum rail system that will support any kind of large sensor camera. Mirrorless is what I was targeting, mirrorless APS-C. That's not quite full frame, but still a very big sensor compared to, say, a GoPro, and so it has that high sensitivity to get high quality Aurora imagery. And the rail system allows any maker model to really be mounted up there, different lenses. It's just a matter of refitting it almost like a tripod. Also in the lid there's sensors like the GPS antenna, an accelerometer, which is used for a digital bubble level, we'll get to that in a second, and temperature and humidity sensors. The belly of the case contains a lot of lithium-ion batteries, because that's something you just don't want to worry about in the field. I want to get 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 nights of shooting without recharging, and that's what this accomplishes, at least at -10 or so. Charging management, so it can be plugged into a USB charger just like a phone, and a Raspberry Pi single board computer that runs the display, runs the camera, and runs the intervalometer that takes pictures every 2 seconds, 6 seconds at whatever ISO and interval you set. So let's go over the steps of setting this thing out and using it. If suppose one arrived Christmas Day under your tree and you wanted to use it for your next Aurora chase, the first thing you do is you take it out to the field with you. You'd set it on a spare tripod. It's got a standard tripod mount on the bottom. And because to be useful, it has to be calibrated. The first calibration you do is turn it on. It finds GPS location and time, but you also need to have it pointing straight up. So just like a bubble level or the artificial horizon in an aircraft, there's accelerometers that tell you how many degrees it's tilted from straight up, and you just tilt it around on your tripod till you get what you want and lock it off. That's it. The whole thing's calibrated and ready to go. The next thing you do is you just press start, and it will start taking time-lapse imagery for the rest of the night while you go and do other things. And that's the whole point. As a photographer, you don't want to be managing extra cameras. You don't want to have a lot of friction by contributing to a project. So this thing is just designed to quietly sit in the background while you take your own pictures, you meet with people, they take their pictures, you just lay on your back and look up at the Aurora if you want. You're not going to miss out because this is capturing all the imagery for you. The Aurora is also on a tripod, so generally locate it just above average human height level, and that prevents light pollution from other people's cameras, headlamps, or whatever else impinging on the imagery, and that turns out to work actually quite well as a light pollution mitigation scheme. Just have it higher than a person. Step 4, you take it back and it automatically will offload your images via Wi-Fi to a server. That's a flexible system right now. Still to be determined a little bit how we're going to do that, whether it's just JPEGs or movie sequences or kiograms or the raw images. It might be a combination of those things depending. And here's an actual still frame from the campaign up in the Yukon. And you just plug it into a USB wall charger like a big phone and let it charge up again. So here's the shots from Midnight Dome, September 8th, I believe, the night of September 8th, up in Yukon. Midnight Dome is great because it's a 360 view, and it's about 6 hours north of Whitehorse, so it's right in the Aurora Oval for a KP 2 or 3. Here's some examples of what the screen was showing: the longitude, latitude, the GPS time, the internal temperature of the system, the relative humidity. RH is useful to tell you if your lens is going to fog up or anything. 900 images were captured in 2 batches, one at 15-second intervals with 15-second exposures, and another one at 2-second intervals with 2-second exposures. One thing I really wanted to make sure with this intervalometer was that there was no dead time. The duty cycle of the frames being gathered was close as possible to 100%, being the shutters always open, gathering something. Otherwise, you end up missing half the Aurora display if you're downloading or processing images between photos. So the software is really written to always be taking pictures, and that makes the time-lapse imagery very smooth. I have a movie that I'm not going to play right now because this is a recording, but I think Laura will share the link in the chat and you can have a look at it. And this is from that night. It's exposures of 2 seconds long every 2 seconds and then put into a 24 frame per second movie. So what is the sort of cost, and can this thing be considered something that anybody could build? I'd say I designed it so that anybody could build it without having access to a machine shop. The cameras now are about $450 for this grade of APS-C 24 megapixel camera. This fisheye lens is a particularly good one that only costs $130, manual focus f2.0 or so. It's remarkably good for this application, and the price is definitely an order of magnitude lower than I would have expected. And all the other stuff like batteries, the Raspberry Pi, sensors and things, I'd say that's around $500. And I targeted around $1,000 per unit Canadian, and I think I'm right about on there, so about $750 US. So what else did we learn from this first few tests? Well, it's nice to just be able to leave it clicking away and just look up in the sky and maybe take your own photos. You don't feel like you're missing out on a auroral display, especially when a stub storm is happening and you're like, oh, that's amazing. You can just look up at it. You feel like you're really getting out from behind the camera. We also caught plenty of meteors, so that was really interesting. I'll have to look back at still frames for that. I think a magnetometer would be useful just for pointing at the north sky. That can sort of be done by looking at the North Star, but maybe a built-in magnetometer to help with that calibration step. The Raspberry Pi actually acts as a 5-watt heater. If you tell it to calculate something like the value of pi really hard, it'll heat up and heat the inside of the case, which can be useful for colder conditions. So why have an extra heater if you can just tell the CPU to heat up a bit? I really feel that also adaptive frame rates is something that will be novel and useful for this. Think of it like bullet time in the Matrix or something. If there's a substorm and a lot of features changing rapidly, I'd want to shoot every half second rather than every 30 seconds, which on the other hand, if there's very dim conditions, say early morning sector, and you're getting pulsing aurora or something, you might want to change the frame rates again in the ISO. Having an adaptive algorithm for that is something I'm working on. It's just a matter of sort of shifting gears between slow motion aurora and fast motion. Most importantly, I'd love to make more of these, get them into people's hands perhaps for testing, and to really gather some feedback about the design, application, and interface and the opportunities for something like this. So follow the progress if you wish. On Twitter, I'm posting the results at Capture North account, and thanks for following. I look forward to your feedback, certainly.